In this video we'll be focusing on cloud computing and hosting cybersecurity. In today's digital age, many organizations are turning to cloud services to help them with their data storage and processing needs. However, with this increased reliance on the cloud comes increased risk. That's why the National Cybersecurity Authority, NCA, has developed specific guidelines and controls for cloud computing and hosting cybersecurity, known as the Cloud Cybersecurity Controls, CCC. In this subdomain, we will be discussing how to ensure the proper and efficient remediation of cyber risks and the implementation of cybersecurity requirements related to hosting and cloud computing as per organizational policies and procedures, and related laws and regulations. We will be going over each control and point in detail, including examples and tools and technology that can be used to meet these requirements. Control 4.2.1. The subdomain 4.2 of the ECC deals with ensuring proper cybersecurity measures for the use of hosting and cloud computing services. To meet the requirement of 4.2.1, organizations need to establish a set of cybersecurity requirements related to the use of hosting and cloud computing services, which should be defined, documented, and approved. These requirements should be based on industry best practices, as well as any relevant laws and regulations, such as the National Cybersecurity Authority's Cloud Cybersecurity Controls, CCC. One example of a use case for this requirement could be an organization that is looking to move their data storage to a cloud-based solution. In order to meet the 4.2.1 requirement, the organization would first need to conduct a risk assessment to identify any potential cybersecurity risks associated with using a cloud-based storage solution. Based on the results of the risk assessment, the organization would then need to define, document, and approve a set of cybersecurity requirements for their cloud-based storage solution. These requirements could include things like data encryption, multi-factor authentication, and access controls to ensure that only authorized users can access the data stored in the cloud. In terms of tools and technology, the organization could use a Cloud Security Posture Management (CSPM) tool to help identify and mitigate any potential risks in their cloud environment. This type of tool can scan cloud environments and identify misconfigurations, missing security controls, and other risks that could be exploited by an attacker. Additionally, the organization could use a Cloud Access Security Broker (CASB) to monitor and control access to the cloud environment, which can help to prevent unauthorized access to sensitive data. It's important to note that in Saudi Arabia, the National Cybersecurity Authority, NCA, has issued separate documentation called Cloud Cybersecurity Controls, CCC, that organizations must comply with when using any cloud solutions. This includes ensuring that data should not be hosted outside Saudi Arabia. Control 4.2.2 requires that organizations implement these cybersecurity requirements. This can include implementing access controls, encryption, and monitoring systems to ensure the security of data on the cloud. To meet the requirement of 4.2.2, organizations must implement the cybersecurity requirements related to the use of hosting and cloud computing services as defined, documented and approved in 4.2.1. This can include implementing various controls and technologies to ensure the security of the organization's information and technology assets hosted on the cloud are processed, managed by third parties. One example of a use case for implementing these requirements could be a company that is planning to move their data storage to a cloud hosting provider. To meet 4.2.2, the company would need to conduct a risk assessment of the cloud provider to ensure that they meet the necessary security standards and comply with relevant laws and regulations, such as the requirement that data should not be hosted outside of Saudi Arabia. They would also need to implement controls such as data classification, virtual server separation, and secure data removal upon service completion. To implement these controls, the company may use a variety of tools and technologies such as Cloud Security Posture Management (CSPM) software, which can be used to assess the security of a cloud provider and identify potential vulnerabilities, encryption technologies to protect data stored on the cloud, and identity and access management (IAM) solutions to control access to cloud resources. Additionally, the company may work with a third-party security consultant to review the cloud provider's security controls and assist with implementing the necessary security measures. It is also important to note that organizations that are using cloud solutions should comply with the separate documentation issued by NCA related to Cloud Cybersecurity Controls, CCC, which is a set of additional security controls that are specific to cloud computing environments, and should be followed if you are using any cloud solutions. Control 4.2.3. states that in addition to the ECC controls from other domains, the cybersecurity requirements related to the use of hosting and cloud computing services must include measures such as classifying data before hosting it on the cloud, separating the organization's environment from other environments hosted by the cloud service provider, and information hosting and storage must be inside Saudi Arabia. Control 4.2.3.1 specifically requires that organizations classify data prior to hosting it on the cloud. This can include identifying sensitive data and ensuring that it is properly encrypted and protected. To meet the requirement of 4.2.3.1, classification of data prior to hosting on cloud or hosting services, it's important to understand the types of data that your organization is handling and to identify which data is sensitive or critical to your business operations. This will allow you to properly classify and handle the data, ensuring that only the appropriate data is hosted on cloud services. One way to classify data is to use a data classification scheme, which categorizes data into different levels of sensitivity. For example, you may have 3 levels of data classification: public, internal, and confidential. Public data can be shared with anyone, internal data can only be shared within the organization, and confidential data is only shared with authorized individuals. Once the data is classified, it's important to implement controls to ensure that the data is properly handled and protected. This can include measures such as encryption, access controls, and monitoring to ensure that only authorized individuals have access to the data and that any potential breaches are detected and responded to quickly. When it comes to selecting a cloud service provider, it's important to ensure that they meet the security requirements set by the regulatory authorities in Saudi Arabia, such as the NCA. This includes ensuring that the provider complies with relevant laws and regulations, such as data protection and privacy laws, and that they have appropriate security measures in place, such as encryption and access controls. To return data in a usable format upon service completion, it's important to ensure that the data is properly backed up and that the backup is in a format that can be easily restored. You should also have a plan in place for how to handle the data once the service ends, including how to properly decommission the data and ensure that it is securely erased. Tools that can be used to implement these controls include data classification software, data encryption tools, and cloud security solutions. Examples of vendors for these types of tools include Symantec, McAfee, and Trendmicro for data classification, and Microsoft Azure Information Protection or Google Cloud Data Loss Prevention for data encryption. Control 4.2.3.2 requires that organizations separate their virtual servers from other environments hosted by the cloud service provider. This can include creating separate virtual networks, firewalls, and access controls to ensure that data is isolated from other tenants on the cloud. Separating an organization's environments, specifically virtual servers, from other environments hosted at the cloud service provider is an important cybersecurity requirement to ensure the protection of the organization's information and technology assets hosted on the cloud. One way to achieve this requirement is through the use of virtual private clouds, VPCs. A VPC is a virtual network that is isolated from other virtual networks within a public cloud environment. It allows organizations to create their own network space within the cloud provider's infrastructure and configure their own network settings such as IP address range, subnets, and security rules. This allows organizations to have complete control over the network and security of their virtual servers, and ensures that their environments are isolated from other tenants of the cloud provider. Another way to achieve this requirement is by using multi-tenancy, which allows for the separation of different virtual environments, by using different instances or resources. This way different customers can have different security settings. In Saudi Arabia, the National Cybersecurity Authority, NCA, has specific requirements that the data should be hosted inside the kingdom. This ensures that the data is under the jurisdiction of Saudi Arabian laws and regulations and can be accessed by authorities if needed. To meet this requirement, organizations should carefully review the services and policies of their cloud service providers and ensure that they are compliant with the NCA's requirements. It is also important to conduct regular security assessments of the cloud environment and implement security controls such as network segmentation, firewalls, and intrusion detection prevention systems to maintain the isolation of the organization's environment from other tenants. Tools that can be used for this include AWS VPC, Azure VNET, Google Cloud VPC, and many other cloud providers. Control 4.2.3.3 Organizations' information hosting and storage must be inside Saudi Arabia as per the requirements of NCA. When it comes to meeting the requirement of 4.2.3.3, which states that organizations' information hosting and storage must be inside the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there are a few key things to keep in mind. First, it is important to understand the specific laws and regulations in place in Saudi Arabia regarding data storage and hosting. The National Cybersecurity Authority, NCA, is the main regulatory body in charge of enforcing these laws and regulations, and organizations should make sure they are in compliance with any guidelines or requirements set forth by the NCA. One way to meet this requirement is by using cloud service providers, CSPs, that are based in Saudi Arabia and have data centers located within the country. This ensures that the organization's data is physically stored within the country and is subject to the laws and regulations of Saudi Arabia. Another way to meet the requirement is by using a hybrid cloud approach where the organization can store their data in-house and use cloud services for backup and disaster recovery. It is important to note that this requirement also applies to any third-party service providers or managed service providers, MSPs, that an organization may be using for hosting or cloud services. Organizations should make sure that these third-party providers are also compliant with the laws and regulations related to data storage in Saudi Arabia. Additionally, organizations should include specific clauses in their contracts with CSPs and MSPs that clearly state the requirement that all data storage and hosting must be done within Saudi Arabia, and have procedures in place to confirm the compliance regularly. In terms of tools and technologies, organizations can use a variety of solutions to ensure compliance with this requirement. For example, they can use monitoring tools to track and log the location of their data, or encryption solutions to protect their data while in transit and at rest. It is important to remember that this is a critical requirement and need to be adhered to very strictly, as non-compliance could lead to serious consequences for the organization, including hefty fines and penalties. Control 4.2.4 requires that organizations periodically review their cybersecurity requirements related to the use of hosting and cloud computing services to ensure that they are still effective and comply with any changes in laws and regulations. As for tools and technology that can be used to meet these requirements, organizations can use cloud security platforms, encryption technologies, and vulnerability management software. Organizations should also consider partnering with a reputable cloud service provider that has robust security controls in place and is compliant with relevant laws and regulations. Additionally, it is important to have a clear contract or service level agreement, SLA, in place with the cloud service provider that outlines the security measures they will implement to protect the organization's data. Subdomain 4.2 about cloud computing and hosting cybersecurity covers many important aspects of securing cloud-based systems and services, such as data classification, environment separation, and compliance with laws and regulations. One important aspect that is not specifically mentioned in this subdomain, but is related to cloud security, is the use of encryption for data stored in the cloud. This is important to ensure that data is protected from unauthorized access, even in the event of a data breach. Additionally, it's important to have a robust incident response plan that is specific to cloud environments, as well as regular monitoring and testing of cloud security controls.